you guys are here. So as I said, this is my favorite thing. And the reason why this is my favorite thing as a pastor is because of my spiritual journey. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So I became a Christian when I was 15. I'd grown up in the church, and I had all sorts of questions that other people might have had, but I just kind of grew up with this sort of vague sense that it was all true, but I really didn't want to have much to do with it. And then when I was 15, there was I'll spare you all the details, but I would just say I had a life-changing encounter with Jesus that it just kind of rocked my world. It filled me with a sense of peace that I had never known. I was new. And then when I went back home, it was a camp experience. And when I went back home, I opened up my Bible and suddenly the thing just jumped. It was like everything made sense. And here's what I'll say. I felt like in that moment that Christianity worked. Like it worked. It worked to do what it was advertised to do, which was to change me, to put me in relationship with God. But here was the question. I had this question because I was, a curious guy. So the question was, did it work because it was true, or was it true because it worked? And let me explain what I mean by that. Was it just true because it worked? Like it just worked for me, it wouldn't work for you, like the color red works for me. And you say, well, sorry, Rick, the color red does not work for me. It doesn't make me happy. It doesn't, lighten my day. It doesn't work for me. So the question is, was it true for me subjectively? Like not in a real way, like the sun is really out there 93 million miles away and that's true for everybody? Or was it just true for me? Or did it work for me because it was true in the same way that the sun works for everybody because it's really out there providing heat and light? So then that's when I became an investigator. I really wasn't an investigator until then. And I just became a person who just wanted to know, is it true because it works, or does it work because it's true? I wanted to know whether this thing that I had come to accept that had really rocked me, turned my life upside down, was real in any objective sense. Does that make sense? So that's why this class matters to me, because this class is really about marrying your heart and your mind. Because when you come to spiritual questions, does God exist? Is Christianity true? Maybe atoms are all that exists? When you come to these really, really big questions, your heart is really a lot of times wanting it to be true, or at least wanting there to be something objectively meaningful about our lives that transcends, atoms, that transcends the physical world. And yet, is there anything more than just us, just atoms in motion? So these are huge questions. Your heart kind of wants to pine for deeper meaning, goodness, truth, beauty. But your brain says, I don't know, right? So this class is about marrying your heart and your mind. And for some of you, you maybe have never been able to do that. And it may be that your resistance to some of the things that Christianity says is true was actually stopped dead in its tracks because your brain could not get over this. And you know what? When we say this, that's what I want to know. What is this? Can you define this? Because whatever this is what this class is about. Because you couldn't get over, let's say, I'll give you some examples. That thorny Bible passage. That bad thing that happened to me or to someone I loved who was a good person. That doctrine of the Christian faith that just seems like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? That moral stand that Christians take that I just find to be abominable. Whatever that is, that's what this class is about. Because it might be that there's a really good answer out there that could satisfy not just your heart, but also your mind. And if that's true, then that could open up the door for you to either get through that really problematic moment, that obstacle to deeper spiritual faith, or even faith in the first place, and get you there. So that's what this is about, and that's why I'm excited about this class, and I really, really love it. And so it's just to give you guys a sense of what's going to go on. Here's some ground rules, okay? So I've got them up here on the screen. So I want to welcome you here. There are a few rules about what we're going to do. First of all, there is no such thing as a dumb question. Trust us, if you think your question is dumb, at least half the group is wishing someone would have the courage to ask it, okay? And here's what we found is over 25 years of doing this class, we do it at least once a year, often 2 or 3 times a year. We do not, James, do we run into new question? I'm trying to think of the last time we ran into a new question that we really is, hey, that's a...
Not really. I think some of the soul body stuff from 2018 rings a bell.
But it's a lot of, we run into a lot of the same
Most people
things.
think and wonder about the same stuff.
Yep. So just know that if you're thinking it, someone else is thinking it. Here's what I also want to say about that, guys, is that you might think that something that you have is a question or an obstacle, or even you've been walking with Jesus for a long time, is heretical or just beyond the pale. Like, I could not ask that, because that would just, because, Rick's a pastor and there's an elder over there. And those people would just be offended. Just, you can scratch that, because we've heard it all and probably thought it all ourselves at some point. So no dumb question, okay? So we want you kind of to feel like it's kind of a place where it's really safe to just kind of take the gloves off. We don't have all the answers. So James is like super smart. He's a computer guy. But neither one of us has ever won Jeopardy. We probably never will. At some point, maybe you'll stump us, and we hopefully have the humility to say, you know what, I don't know, and then we will together do some digging, right? Then we just kind of, so we don't want this to be a fount of all knowledge kind of thing, and that relates to the last ground rule, but we'll get to that in a second. Third ground rule is we operate from the premise that God does not play his cards close to his vest. So as a follower of Jesus, just realize he's taught so many times that the Father is eager to reveal himself to you. Now you say, well, maybe Jesus didn't know the Father. He didn't know what God, he didn't know what he was talking about. He might not have, but we're operating from the premise. So just so you know, that's a faith position that we'll be talking to you from for the next few weeks, is we believe that if there is a God, he wants to be investigated. He wants you to ask questions. And so that God is eager to reveal himself to us if we genuinely seek God. Jesus had this famous line, if you ask, it will be given to you. If you seek, you will find. If you knock, the door will be open to you. And so it's just a real affirmation of the seeking process. And we may have a question now from the audience. Go ahead, Michael.
So one of the ones that just came up said, why doesn't he just speak aloud?
Okay, that's really good. We're going to get to
question one.
That's question one. So that's what this week is going to be about. It's going to be about just collecting all of our questions. And so this is already, I can tell, just started to spur some interest. Okay, so let's mark that, Michael, and then James, who's going to be our stenographer, will write it down. Okay, last ground rule, and that's discussion is allowed. So when one of you in this class tonight, you're going to say, for example, that question, thank you, by the way, a question is going to come up and someone else is going to say, oh yeah, and that spurs this other thing. Or you'll actually want to talk to each other. Like you'll say, I've had that question before, and when I did, I thought X. I want you guys to feel free that we can talk to each other in the class, and that you can talk back and you can stop me and you can say, whoa, Rick, that doesn't make sense. It is not unheard of that you'll ask a question. I'll start into some sort of eloquent and just genius reply. And you'll say, you're not answering my question, Rick. You're going off on a totally wrong rabbit trail. So I will not be embarrassed if you throw your hand up in the middle of that and say, yeah, Rick, actually what I meant was, and stop me, right? So I just want us to feel like we've got a lot of banter is allowed going on. In fact, what did we say? Discussion is allowed. Check that. It's encouraged. Actually, it's absolutely essential. Right? So that's where we're at. One more thing, and I'm just going to kind of lay the groundwork here. I always ask James to share his story because it just gives you a sense of kind of the important place that investigating played in his spiritual journey, kind of like mine. So, and then after that, we're going to open it up. So then we're going to start asking questions. So go ahead, James. Investigation. What role did that play in you becoming a Christian? The Reader's Digest version.
The Reader's Digest version. So, raised in a Christian home, left the faith when I was a teenager because of stuff. Later on, post getting married and all that good stuff, decided that I'd better get this whole God thing figured out. Decided that, I didn't care whether, people were being changed by it. If it wasn't real, I didn't want anything to do with it. So I decided that there had to be one of two things were true. and couldn't both be true at the same time. Either the universe is a created thing, and by design, everything in it is by design, or everything is completely random, and we're just here, and there's not really any reason or purpose to it. Couldn't be true of both of those things at the same time, so that's when I started to dig. So I'll say truth is like the primary reason or driver behind that investigative process. The result of which was my return to the faith in March of 2009. And then after that, deciding that, since God went through all kinds of trouble to like have a Bible available to me so I could understand who God is and what he's like, I decided I better start reading things. So I started getting, I read through it a few times, and then I just couldn't anymore. If I was going to have to read Leviticus just one more time, I was not going to make it. So I decided instead of going wide in Scripture, I would learn how to go deep in Scripture. So I reached out to a pastor friend of mine, not him. I don't think I even knew you then, and said, "Hey, when you're going to prepare a sermon, how do you do it? Like, how do you unpack Scripture?" So he taught me, and I've been employing that method ever since. And that's kind of how I landed here, sort of.
Very good. All right, thanks, James. And then here's another thing before we get going, because this is all going to be about your questions. That the whole frame of this is going to hang on questions that you've got. So before we get any further, I just want to let you know that kind of a couple of I guess what do we call this? Housekeeping stuff. Okay, first of all, just so you know, there's resources that you might want to dive into, because lots and lots of, look, let me tell you this. Our church started in 1995, recognizing that the culture rather, was moving hard towards a post-Christian future. In other words, just this idea that Christianity was just the presumed worldview of people was becoming an artifact, a thing of the past. And perceiving that to be true, we said we needed to be a church that was prepared to deal with the questions of skeptics, of people who are post-Christian. Okay, so that's kind of why that's in our DNA as a church. And so you can, just ask yourself the question, did the culture go more or less post-Christian since 1995? And the answer is, yeah, way more, right? Little old Allen Creek did not stop the cultural tides that were in operation. So more and more resources are available to you to investigate. And here's a few. I'll just throw them out there. Websites. This one I just really love because it's built on, I think probably, my assessment, is one of the most, gracious and intelligent defenders of Christian belief. And this guy named William Lane Craig. So this is his website, Reason and Faith, or it's called Reasonable Faith. And that's him right there. And just, you think, you want to ask any old question, he's literally got a catalog of, 1,000 questions or something that people have asked him. And some of it just goes so deep, you just go, whoa, that's over my head. You might have something really basic to ask, but you can. And you can find it in a catalog of old questions. There is another one called Reasons to Believe. This is by a Christian astronomer named Hugh Ross. And this was started by him in, I think, the late 80s or whatever. And it was all about whether or not there's reasons to believe. And specifically, he really delves into science and the issues of creation and evolution and that sort of thing. Then there's this other website by the Intelligent Design. Specifically, some of you might have questions about the creation evolution thing. That was a big deal for James. And this question really kind of tackles issues related to design. And we'll talk about that. And if there's a compatibility between the theory of evolution and Christianity, is there something inherently a problem? If it's a question you have, some of you may not have a question on that. But anyhow, this website really deals very specifically with that. And then little old Allen Creek Community Church also has our Ask Anything page. And there you can ask anything. So we got a little form you can fill out. And there we have a little catalog also of questions that people have asked and responses from yours truly. Okay, so that's just some stuff that's out there for you guys. So so the classes, I have no prepared curriculum other than just I know mostly of a lot of the questions that are being asked. So or that have been asked. So we want to just deal with what is on your mind. So if you think about the palette of investigative questions, it can go all the way from the deeply, personal, which is, someone asked the question, why doesn't God speak directly to me? If he wants to have a relationship with me, why doesn't he talk to me? To the really theoretical, right? Like, how could a good God be in charge of a world that has a lot of evil in it? Or, who made God? That's a philosophical question. In fact, my 4-year-old granddaughter just asked me that question. And I thought, this is amazing. This question is asked, who made God question is asked by 4-year-olds and skeptics. 25-year-old skeptics and 4-year-old thinkers, because that's just a natural question. Everything that you look around, she's 4 years old and she's already figured out that everything started somewhere. She's got that whole chain of cause and effect thing going on, right? Now she looks at a chair and she goes, that started somewhere. Someone made that in a factory. And then that person was born and they had a mommy and a daddy, so she's got that whole thing. And then she just already has gone, well, and how did God get made? And so there's my 4-year-old asking a really profound philosophical question. So anyhow, your questions may run the gamut. And I just want you guys to feel free to just lay it out there. And one of you will break the ice and then away we go. It looks like someone online already did.
Yes.
So let's start there. And then we'll start, I'll start writing them on the board, and that might spur some of your thinking, and James will make sure he writes them down too. So what's the first one there, Michael? Oh, I got to write in a pen.
Brenda has asked, why do such horrific things happen to innocent people when they have never wronged anyone or hurt a soul?
Yeah. So this is classic, and it might be the greatest, hardest question that is asked of the Christian faith, really of any theistic religion. Why do bad things happen to good people?
And then that first one I asked is, why doesn't he speak aloud? That came from Zen.
I got it.
Excellent. So can say it again. Why doesn't?
If God wants to reveal himself so eagerly, why doesn't he speak aloud?
Good. This reminds me, by the way. Oh, and so just so you know, we may dip just like little puddle deep today. So we'll, depending on how much time we have and some of the questions that are asked, and what triggers something in me. But on this particular question, I was watching a debate between an atheist and a Christian, and the atheist opened the debate by saying, "I'm going to prove my point right now in the next 30 seconds. I'm going to say if God's real, he will strike me dead because I'm blaspheming right now and saying that God doesn't exist." So, and of course, there was a whole argument that ensued from that. But it kind of gets to this, right? A little bit like we presume that if God, the God of Christianity exists, that he is really, really interested in relationship and getting to know us and intervening so that we can know him. And so if that's all true, then why the silence from heaven? It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. All right, so now we've got started. Someone broke the ice. Thank you, online. Who is this?
That one is Zanette.
Oh, okay, yeah. Zanette Fouché?
Yes.
Awesome. So thank you, Zanette. So what else? What else has bugged you?
What does baptism represent?
Awesome. Great question.
Yeah, quite a few.
Fire them out. I keep up.
How do you get into heaven? What if you live a 50-50 life? Do you get a choice at the end?
50-50.
50-50 good works, bad works, right? That's what we're saying. Yep. Yep.
50-50 odds. You were 50% good, 50% bad.
Where is heaven located?
This is really great. Thank you, Steve. 50-50 life, destiny. I'm going to do some shorthand. James is getting the full. What was the next one?
Where is heaven located?
Jesus, what's your 20? That might be funny.
What did you say?
To hear a trucker say that. Jesus, what's your 20?
Oh, geez, what's your 20? Yeah. Nice.
And then, are humans predestined for heaven or hell?
Oh, boy, you're so great.
Brenda asks, where is it? I would like an answer to free will. Shouldn't good people be protected?
Can you say that again?
other than the answer free will, shouldn't good people be protected?
Yeah, and that's connected. I'm hearing you, Brenda. That's connected to this, right? Because if there's a good God, why is he not intervening and changing the ball game?
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put in parentheses that you would like to hear an answer other than free will,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna guarantee that that's gonna be part of it. So, like, what's 2 + 2? And you can't say 4. Throwing that out there.
Okay, but okay. So this is a a well-instructed person who's asking this because they understand that the existence of evil in the world hangs on this. But I think what they're saying is Brenda, right? So Brenda, I hear you, and I think what she's saying is that God is also a will in the universe, right? And that's a really good point to bring up. If God is also a free will in the universe, can he not override free wills? And that is a big
There's
question.
also a presumption in there. The presumption is that he doesn't protect it,
There, yep, that's right.
which may not be correct as a presumption.
Right, yes. And then it'll be, yep. So,
This is off topic, but
Yep.
Jonathan wants to know the list of questions. Will they be posted online?
To everybody except for to Jonathan.
yeah. Yes, we'll post it online for sure. Is that Jonathan Riggs?
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, Jonathan, I'm glad you're out there. Lots of people in the class today. So that's really, really good. So yes, we'll get it out to, and if we, and if it's Jonathan, we've got him. I know who that is, so we'll get you based on your knowing your address. If you ask a question and you think I might not know how to get a hold of you, throw me an email, and we'll get you on the list. This is really great stuff. This is really, really great stuff. So this gets into a massive thing that divides Christians. Let me say a little something about that. When we're answering some of these questions, like this one, and then also the questions about creation, evolution, there'll be others, maybe even baptism. Not all Christians are agreed on every point of each of these things. So what I will try to do in this class is be very honest about that. And we'll also be honest about where our church lands on some of these points of controversy. And that actually will tell you something. So in other words, there's something for us to learn even when we won't be definitive. And when we won't be definitive, that will tell you, oh, there are issues of Christian belief that are not like at the absolute center as litmus tests of Christian belief. Like they're out here as secondary or even tertiary issues that Christians, good-hearted Christians, disagree about and debate about and don't necessarily agree on. And that actually is kind of a liberating thing because it can kind of tell you that, okay, so in some of these things there's controversy and actually that comes out of the Bible. Like there's a really great line from the Apostle Paul in the letter to the Corinthians. Here's what he says. He says, now we see in a glass dimly, then face to face. What he means is now we don't know everything. And he's actually specifically talking to a group of Christians who were pretty proud of themselves because they thought they had all knowledge. Like they thought they had the whole thing case. They thought they had Christianity just all mapped out. They were so proud of their knowledge. And they were Greeks, so they're Greek converts, and Greeks put a huge emphasis on wisdom. So Paul pushes back on that a little bit and says, okay, I know you're really, really smart, but he says, we don't know everything. We don't see everything now. So that's actually really humbling. And especially in a class like this, Investigations, where we're giving answers, it's good for us to know that, right? I think it's good for us to say we don't know everything, and there will be issues where we won't settle everything, and issues where Christians will disagree, but that won't mean that we won't have an opinion on things. Okay, so
I got one.
yeah, go.
Suicide.
Mm.
Is someone forever condemned to hell?
Okay, yes. This is a really often asked question. Is this the unforgivable sin? Now, presuming that we would agree that it is a sin, and some may not. I noticed actually the other day, front page article on the Herald of a police officer, and she committed suicide, but they very specifically avoided using that phrase. That phrase will, in fact, never be used in polite company ever again. Have you noticed that? The ex committed suicide. What's the phrase that's used now in polite company? So-and-so died by suicide. That's now the phrase. Why? To divorce the person who does it from the act, as if it was done in some sense to them. It was involuntary. And so I say that just to clarify that the person who's asking the question is already presuming that there's agency. Right? That's what sin implies, is that I did it. I deliberately did it and it was bad. Some may disagree that there is agency in suicide, but so we can deal with that if that's a secondary question. But anyhow, the question is often asked, and thank you for laying it out there. And we can understand why. If suicide is a sin, it's the last thing you do. By definition, it's the last thing you do on this planet. So it's a thing you can't turn from. It's a thing you can't repent of. So therefore, does that mean that it is unforgivable? Because if we presume, again, this question is layered with presumptions. It's layered with the presumption that it's a sin that can't be turned from. It's layered with the presumption that if it can't be turned from specifically, it can't be forgiven.
So does that mean if you sinned before you got in, say, a car accident? Does that mean that you would go to hell?
Well, right, and you're asking the exact right question, because it's by those sorts of questions that we can hone in on a good answer here. Because mixed company. I was going to list another sin that you could die in the middle of. Are you with me? You're tracking? You could die in the middle of some other sins, very, very inappropriate ones, but that wouldn't be labeled suicide. And does that mean that person? You're exactly right. It's like once you've honed in on it, we have to take it out of the issue of suicide to get our answer. If I die in the act of any sin and I cannot specifically turn from that specific sin, does that imply that I cannot enter into life? And I think we're starting to hone in on an answer already. But yeah, we'll save it. We'll save the deep dive there for a second, for when we finally get to it. By the way, I'd like to go 6:30 to 8 and try to honor your guys' time on that, just in case you guys were wondering what our framework is.
That
Okay.
was code for Rick saying more questions.
Some lighter fare maybe, but
Yeah.
I've actually always wondered about this stuff. 3 things.
Yeah.
How did the earth get populated?
Okay.
Because we have Adam and Eve and Cain. What about the giants?
Oh boy.
Not San Francisco Giants.
The Genesis 6 giants.
Yeah.
And what about the angels?
In that same passage?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. What about the giants and angels? This does sound like a sports question. Angels in specifically Genesis 6. Okay, so if anybody doesn't know, I'll just lay out the framework there and we'll answer it later. Genesis 6 specifically talks about the sons of God, which is often a reference in the Old Testament to angels who look upon the daughters of men as fine and go to them and copulate with them and produce offspring. And the offspring are said to be giants. So there you go. And you find that in Genesis chapter 6. So Tim's question is, are we talking about literal giants, figurative giants? Are these actually angels? Because they're not called angels, they're called sons of God. So could that be a reference to something else other than angels? That's all that's involved in this question. And it's a really good one.
Yeah, it's basically,
Thank you.
how weird did things get?
Yes, exactly.
Right before.
Yeah. Right before. And this is right before the flood narrative of Genesis.
Things
Okay.
got weird.
Great question. Okay.
Might as well throw the other one on there, which is young Earth versus old Earth.
Yeah, that'll all be tied together.
Oh, you just scored so many points with Fritz's
I
his
know.
favorite topic.
We'll just have to tackle it and shut it up.
Exactly. That's enough. Fire hose, turn off. Okay. Young Earth, old Earth. And yes, and that's a great question. And you're hearkening back to what we said about predestination. There's wild disagreement among Christians about this, and that's what you're going to find here. And I think you're going to be really helped here, because this is a bit of a, like we've already joked about it, it's a bit of a pet topic for me. And what I've really gotten a lot out of is just realizing that people can take the Bible very seriously and have differences of opinions on this. And I think that that will really, really be important, especially if you have a larger concern about how Christianity meshes with science. So just any science. Like if you think of Christians as sort of like knuckle-dragging science deniers, this will be a really important question that will have its fingers in other pots, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Where does the supernatural fall into God? Like demons, the angels, the monster, which is...
I'm not clear on the question.
Where does it fit into? Can say more words about that? I understand angels and demons and fitting into God, but what do you mean? Like, where are they real?
Are they real?
Are they real? Just real simple. Okay. Are we to believe that angels and demons actually exist?
All the monsters.
Okay. When you say monsters, what do you mean by that?
What you hear in folklore, werewolves, vampires.
Oh, those. Okay. Well, that's kind of a whole nother question. Just because that isn't mentioned in the Bible. Believe that angels and demons exist.
And how do they interact with us?
Good.
Sub question here. Good.
Two questions off those questions. So what is the unforgivable sin?
Ah, yes. Because the Bible talks about that, not in the context of suicide, which matters, but it does talk about an unforgivable sin. So what is it? That's excellent. What is the unforgivable sin?
I think our youngest attendee has a question.
Amelia, yes.
Do dinosaurs exist?
Oh, yeah. Great question. I'm just going to give you a short answer right now. We're going to say yes. And then we'll explain a bit better how it fits with the Bible, because that's a bigger question, right? But the answer is for sure. And that, I think, relates to, again, how do we handle science? What is the world telling us when we like go into the earth and dig up bones? And then what is the Bible telling us? And are those two stories, can they match, right? That's a really important thing. So were there, are there, present tense, past tense? Are we like, is this a Jurassic Park question? Were there really dinosaurs? And I'm adding this little thing and then fitting this with the Bible story. This is what's so important when we think about science, is that we think about having two books. God has given us two books. Christians believe this. Not everybody believes this, but Christians believe that God's given us two books. And one of them is the Bible, and that is a book. And as God's book, it's a revelation of truth. And then we have the book of the world. And you say, well, how did they ever think about the world like a book? Well, guess what? The early scientists were all Christians. And because they were people of the book, they started looking at nature through the lens of the book. And what's interesting is that God's book talks about nature quite a bit, and it talks about it like a book. So it says things like this. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they display knowledge. That's what the book, God's book, says about nature. So the early Christian scientists, and you know their names, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, Louis Pasteur, all those cats were Christians. And the way they looked at nature was like it was a book. And it was because God had made it, it was God's book. It was his second book. And so now we had this issue of, well, what if the two books don't agree? And when the early scientists, that question never came up. was fascinating. That's why they started science. They started science because they believed that God was a ordered God who spoke. He was Word. Like that was a word for Jesus. Jesus' other name was Word. So when they looked at the nature, they just looked at it like it was a book. Like it was like it could be. It was ordered. Here's a word, fancy word, intelligible. It made sense. And so as something that would make sense, they believed that they could study it and say, oh, look at its patterns. Oh, they're repeatable. And if they're repeatable, they're measurable. If they're measurable, we can figure out what God was doing in the system and the order of the whole thing. So that's how science got started. But then the question became, oh, but wait a minute. Now science is telling us stuff that we think is actually at odds with the other book, the book of God, the Bible. And that's when we had this potential for conflict. And but what's fascinating is most people don't know this. Most people don't know that the early scientists, there was utterly no conflict. It was exact opposite. It wasn't just that there was no conflict between the book of nature and God's book. It was that God's book was driving them to the book of nature to understand it. It is not at all too far-fetched to say that Christians invented science. That sounds a grand claim for Christianity, but it's not even remotely an exaggeration. I mean, it's a historical fact that science arose in human history only once, and in the Christian West. And once it was invented, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, including atheists, who are now, that is their only source of truth. So, all right. So every once in a while, I'll just go then down a rabbit trail on that. Let's keep going.
You're good to erase. I've got all 15.
Okay, excellent.
You talked about the litmus test of Christianity.
Yeah.
What is the litmus
Oh,
test
excellent.
of Christian faith?
Excellent. So if we can say that there are the primary issues and then there's the other ones, secondary issues, that relates to Steve's questions. Like,
core non-negotiables.
yeah, core non-negotiables, because Steve, you're asking questions about baptism, but also, what was your second question? It was
predetermination.
no. Well, there was a couple before that. It was about what's that?
How do you get to heaven?
Yeah, that's core, right? Yeah. So it's really connected to those. I like that. So what am I at? 15?
Number 17.
16. So 16. Thank you, Mark. What are the core doctrines or ideas? It's a fancy word for just says ideas of the Christian faith. If I use X for Christ, it's not because I'm trying to X out Jesus. It's because the Greek word for Christ begins with the Greek letter chi, which is X. And I'm just saving time. I had to explain that one time. Why are you Xing out Jesus? I'm not Xing out Jesus. Just an abbreviation. Okay. So yeah, let's keep going. This is really good. Thank you. What are the core? And there's some really great places in the Bible to go to for this. They're actually, it's almost like they have a preamble that clues you in. It's like, oh, that's the key stuff, because of the way that they're identified. They're set apart by the apostles themselves. So it's really good. It's great that we have that. What beyond that is like you say, okay, well, then if you don't get this, then you're not a Christian. Okay, really good. What else?
Does the multiverse exist?
What about the multiverse? Can someone give me a definition of the multiverse?
Our universe just exponential possibilities. Like there's
Yes.
different universes that we all, I guess, are part of.
Yes. Well, no. Well, yeah. That there's right. There's a whole bunch of different versions of it. The one you're talking about is the many worlds hypothesis, where basically for every human and every choice we make, we split off, and there's a new universe, and there's an infinite number of these universes that just keep splintering off into a million different directions. The more sober version of this is simply that our universe is one of an infinite number of universes that just keep getting generated out of quantum physics. That quantum physics creates a potential for universes just to keep being made over and over again. And the metaphor, the way to think about it is to imagine our universe like a bubble on top of your bathtub when you put bubble bath in it. And you imagine like there's all those bubbles, and they go boop, 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 boop. And then as you pour water in it, they keep bubbling, 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 and they just keep more and more and more and more and more. And if you can imagine that, that's sort of like a physical or a mental picture of what some scientists believe could be true of the universe, that there's these literally an infinite number of them. What we'll find out is, it's a great question. What we'll find out is, well, if there's any evidence for it, and I will not be an expert on this, but I think the more important question for us is, why would we even put this out there? Like, what is this? Well, it's an explanation for something. It's an explanation for design. When you look at our universe, it's like unbelievably fine-tuned. So when something is unbelievably fine-tuned, what do you always think? You think, well, someone did that. Like if you picked up a clock in the middle of a watch in the middle of the forest, you wouldn't say, wow, I wonder how wind erosion and wood decay made this instrument that tells time perfectly. What's the assumption you would make? The assumption you make is someone made this. When something is intricate and finely tuned, right? So the universe is like that. So how do you get out of that? How do you get out of that? You've got to find a way. So this is the way. And how does this do that? Well, it's like this. If you can imagine that every part of our universe, all of its basic building blocks are like incredibly finely tuned little features that they need to come up just so, like a jackpot, like a if you're pulling the cord on a jackpot, it's got to come up cherry, 9 different windows. And so you think to yourself, well, what are the odds of that? Well, not very good. That's why it's Vegas and you're going to lose money. But what if they did? And not only what if they came up cherries on 9 windows out of a bunch of different possibilities, but they did so 100 times in a row. Would you say, wow, I got lucky? Right? You wouldn't say that. What would you say? You'd say, conspiracy. What would you say?
It would be a pattern.
Exactly. And the pattern would tell you that an intelligent agent monkeyed with it. And you'd probably go to jail. You'd probably go to jail, right? So that is exactly what's going on with the multiverse. Because the multiverse is a bunch of different kicks at the cat when it comes to getting the jackpot of properties that are just right for life.
It's also a means to escape the awe you sense at witnessing anything made that is intricate or highly complex. Because your natural inclination is looking and go, wow, somebody really knew what they were doing here. I mean, I see the insides of watches; they're complicated. So if you can somehow jettison your awe by postulating the idea that, oh, this kind of thing happens all the time.
Yes.
You barely even have to try. You just pull the lever, and then it takes the miraculous out of it. Your awe is now gone, and you don't feel the need to explain anymore.
Right. Nothing is then more complicated or more interesting than water flowing down a hill. Because you say, well, why would that be, Rick? Well, because water flowing down a hill is just matter following physical laws. That's all that it is. So if that's all that everything is, including the brilliance of the people in this room or that camera that I'm looking at right now, then that just, like James says, it just guts me of all the awe. It's like, oh, that's just like water. Like water flowing down a hill is not that impressive. I mean, it's just matter, just following laws. And if that's all that is, then I guess it's not interesting anymore. It's not designed anymore.
Does
So
that also lead to like nothing matters, right? Like,
absolutely. So then the other,
nihilism.
exactly. Because then the next thing is, well, if nothing's designed, then we came from nowhere and we're going nowhere. It has massive implications for human meaning and value. Absolutely. Yep. And morality. I mean, just so many things hang on that. And that's, it's a big, big deal. All right. Sorry, we kind of got into that. So we may We may get to do the light treatment on that when we get there. But that is a really important sort of part of the creation evolution questions. What else? What's on your mind? What hangs you up when you think about
What about
Bible?
religions that existed before Christianity?
Yeah. So, and specifically, what about them?
Just the
Bunch of
ones
different
that
ways.
share like the same, I guess, story or the same character arc, I guess, where it's like born of a virgin.
Oh, okay, very good. See, I'm glad I asked you that because there's a bunch of ways we could go with that, right? We could say, well, what about how does Judaism relate to Christianity or whatever? But you're asking, what about religions, specifically pagan religions, that have features that look just like Christian stuff? Very good. What about religions that share Christian basics or Christian story elements? Let's put it like that. Okay, and then the further question is, and I think this is what you're saying, right, Steve? Are they borrowed, right? Like, does Scripture just borrow it? Is just cobbled together a bunch of these crazy stories from a bunch of religions and now repackage them as bring it's Christianity? Yeah, that's a great question and commonly asked. And by the way, this particular thing has made the rounds on the internet. This particular theory, and it's called. There's a name for this. It's called Jesus Mythicism. So it kind of says that the whole Jesus thing was just borrowed from myths. And and actually it was a really popular way of looking at Christianity in the 1800s. And it kind of went out of favor. And then it just, in the age of the internet, this Jesus mythicism just got a new life again, like lots of things.
It makes its rounds every Easter.
Every Easter, exactly. Yeah.
All the memes.
Yep. Horus was born a virgin. What else is said? Oh, he died, rose from the tree. Oh, and Mithras had 12 disciples, and there's a whole suite of ideas that are said to have been borrowed from pre-Christian or pagan religions. Great question. All right, what else? Lee is here.
Sorry, guys. Soccer.
Oh, no worries.
Where is there a historical fact for the flood? Because that was considered like world.
Yeah, okay, that's great, and we'll tie that together with all of our creation evolution stuff. What is the evidence for the flood? Can I add this evidence for the flood, and then let's go local or universal, because that's a question that people are asked. If we presume that a flood happened, there's three different options. There was no flood; it's just a myth. There was a flood; it was local, or there was a flood and it was universal. In other words, it covered the whole world. So we'll ask which of those are what's most plausible there. It's good. Great question. Yeah.
How do I find my way out of Jesus loves everybody but me?
That's good. And that's a cut close to home. How do you phrase it?
How do I find my way out of, quote, Jesus loves everybody but me, end quote.
Jesus loves everybody but me.
Yeah, and to put a fine point on that, I think, Tim, you're getting at what a lot of people will feel when it feels like God has either abandoned us or has marked us for special tribulation or judgment. I had someone come into my office the other year, quite a while back, and they just said, am I the ant on the sidewalk and God is, playing with me with a magnifying glass? And you can't help but sometimes feel that way when circumstances just besiege us with suffering, and especially if we see other people who aren't going through similar trials. I think Brenda was asking some of the same questions earlier too. Excellent question. Thank you for asking it. Okay, what else?
So assuming you can have a righteous anger,
Yeah.
how are you to deal or express that or
Got
deal
it.
with that, or
Yes. Okay, good. So if anger can be righteous,
In traffic.
how to express? Is that fair?
yeah,
As a follower of Jesus.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And
All right, Rick,
Yeah.
you keep moving.
oh, sorry.
So either if you're gonna be writing there,
Okay,
I know you go there.
I'll try to come back to the middle.
Exactly.
I'll try to
Go
come back to
dead
the middle.
center.
I'm
There's
coming
no
back to the
problem.
middle.
But the way did ask a question though. He asked, "What is the biblical view of infant baptism?"
Oh, okay, very good.
Infant baptism.
Infant baptism. So Steve asked a question earlier about baptism. What is the Bible on infant baptism?
By David.
Great question. And as probably you might presume from the question, there are different Christian streams that practice it and that some that don't. So it almost by definition is going to be put in that sort of secondary list of teachings and practices, but nevertheless important because it will relate to kind of how we think about Christian salvation overall. So yeah, really good question. Thank you, Dwayne. That's Dwayne?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Dwayne. Let's keep going. What else?
I got one. Why don't we see the miracles that Jesus
Mm,
time now? Where are those miracles now?
that's a great question. Let's go to the same miracles today. That's a great question. And yeah, I mean, who hasn't experienced unanswered prayer? And that you think to yourself, well, God can do anything, so why not? And why not answer my prayer? And that's an excellent question. I think that yeah, there'll be lots of layers to this. One, it's going to help us deal with our presumption that the Bible is just a miracle book. In other words, it's just one unending string of miracles. But in historical context, we'll realize that actually it's like punctuated seasons of miracles. And that we shouldn't draw out of that this idea that how God is acting, for example, in the ministry of Elijah or the ministry of Jesus, or even during the time of the Exodus, is how God is going to intervene at all times in all eras. So, but nevertheless, especially with based on some of the things Jesus said himself, with God all things are possible, and my followers will do greater works than me. We should have a high expectation for God's interventions in the miraculous. So why not? Great question. And we'll actually have some additional resources for you on that one that might actually just blow you away. Actually, we're in a series right now called Restoring Wonder to Our Lives, and I'm really been on this topic in my own personal reading for a while, and that question really resonates with me. And we're going to talk about it for the next 4 weeks at church, just FYI. And
Dwayne asks, what's your name?
yes, sir.
He asks, how can we distinguish between demon possession, and mental illness, or are they one and the same?
Got it. Good question. Difference between demonic possession and mental illness. Yeah, great question. And especially now, like with mental health being in the news every night, right? It's a question. And you look at the pages of the Bible and you go in one or two directions. You can either say that when Jesus is performing exorcism and healings on people who are demonically oppressed, that maybe that's just those people who are depressed and anxious and bipolar and all the things that we have diagnoses for today. And so you can go one or two directions. Or you could say, no, all of our diagnoses of mental illness today are in fact demonization. Or then there maybe is some ground in between there. So we'll see if we can chart the path there. But that's a great question. What else?
I've been hearing this a lot. When is the apocalypse supposed to happen?
Oh,
Because I heard 20
yes.
years ago. I
Yeah.
heard 10 years ago. I heard Y2K. Climate change. When is the apocalypse supposed to happen?
With or without zombies?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And also on people's minds, I mean, I guess always, maybe ever since, well, always, because I'm thinking like even 160 years ago, the church was really known. You wouldn't go into a church in the 1890s and not see a chart on the Sunday school wall that had a detailed biblical diagram of how the end times were going to go. And then that carried all the way into the 1900s, and then it got juiced up to a cottage industry with Hal Lindsey in the 1970s and the late great Planet Earth. And then if it could get higher octane than that, it did when LaHaye came out with the Left Behind series. And then since then, there's been a tapered off a little bit. I think that there's been a tapering of our enthusiasm based on a bunch of predictive failures on the when question. There's something inherently presumptuous about that we'll get into. It's a great question, though. Lots of.
I got a question for you.
Go, Robin.
So I've been close to dying 4 different times. How come he doesn't bring me home?
It's almost like the opposite with some of these other questions, right? That's really, really profound.
Did you say 5?
It's actually more than that, but let's go.
Can you
4th one.
Can you rephrase or repeat that for the online?
Robin's had the specific experience of being close to death 5 times, multiple times. And the question is, why does God not just bring him home? And I'm assuming underneath that, there's a suffering component to that, because there's an extension of suffering. Because the other flip of that is he's pulling you back every time, which is almost miraculous if we're talking about being that close that many times. It feels like God's yanking you back. So there's 2 ways we go on that. We say, wow, God is preserving me against all odds.
Yeah.
Does it feel like that? So that's kind of cool. Wow. And then at the same time, though, you continue to suffer, but not full and complete healing, and therefore suffering just gets extended. Brother.
I'm healed to be able to live.
Yeah.
If you will.
But the quality of life is not awesome. It's a great,
Good.
profound and hard question. When close to death, why would God not bring us home? I know this sounds very specific to you, and it is. It's a really personal question. By the way, thank you for being vulnerable with us with that. But you're not the first. Like I remember we had Jonna's grandmother living with us till she died, and she asked that question every day. She said to Jonna, my wife, Jonna, she said, Jonna, why am I still here? What am I doing here? And she lived a really long time. Like she lived to be 96. But again, she felt like, well, what can I do? I can get up, I can eat, I can sleep, I watch TV. And I know that's not your life, but she was thinking the same way you were, which is, I'm getting this really cool gift, a really long life, which is in some sense like, don't people want that? Like they pray for that for their children, But she had the exact same impulse you did, Robin, which was, I don't understand why God is dragging this out.
And then I asked often, what am I to learn from this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
I'm experiencing this.
Yeah.
What is that reason?
Right. I feel like we might rely on you when we get here to fill in some of what you're learning in here, because it's very personal and experiential, and I'm anxious to know maybe what you're learning in that. Yes, sir, Michael. More?
Okay, it goes close to that. Is the near-death experience.
Oh yeah, our near-death experience is real. Can I say that? Say it like that?
Or a chemical.
Our near-death experience, NDEs, they have a name, isn't that right, Mark? In the field, in the medical field, are NDEs real? Is there another layer to the question?
Is it a chemical?
Or just the remnants, or just a natural or physical phenomenon.
Correct.
21 grams.
What's that? Is that a movie? Is that so about?
When you die, your body decreases.
That's right.
21 grams.
Yes. There's a bunch of movies that played on this. There's one in the 90s where a bunch of young punk scientists bring each other to near-death experiences. Flatliners. That's it. That's it. There is a lot of material on this, guys. There's a lot of material on this.
Well, that goes into the next one I have, is the afterlife. Like, what happens when we are not of this existence anymore?
Are we getting okay? So do we want that question to be out of the medical field and into the theological?
Let's go that route.
Okay, so let's get into the theological. What happens when we die?
Because the joke is you're up in the early days.
Yeah, exactly.
Right there,
What? Yes. Let me put it in a fancy way. What is our post-mortem experience? And again, this is we're taking all of that because has anybody died here? Nobody, well, except maybe I don't know how close you got, but nobody's died here, so nobody's come back with authority. So we're taking all this on faith. So it is the Christian position that we can have knowledge about this question only because we're getting that knowledge from Jesus. So great question. And this this is a great question just because it's a great question to dispel common misconceptions of the Christian position on the post-mortem experience. Because it is often assumed, just like Michael said, that, we die and we become wisps on the clouds and God hands us a harp or something and a robe.
So, how come Christians don't fully believe that they're forgiven?
Yeah. Yeah, why can't Christians believe, or let's just also say like live in, because maybe they can have an intellectual agreement with that idea, but they don't live like it, right? Isn't that your question? Why don't they live like it?
No,
They just don't believe that they're forgiven.
no. They have something that they're hanging on to
Okay.
that they don't feel they can
It's
forgive.
too reprehensible. Okay. Yeah, why can't Christians believe that they can be forgiven of anything?
Yes.
Because they've got the thing that God can't forgive. Right? Something like that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Great question. Yeah. And it does, people find themselves, they feel like they're on an island. And that's why sometimes the therapy of confession not just, helps the person who's confessing, but it helps the person being confessed to sometimes, because it's permission giving. It's like, oh, we're a community of strugglers and everything is on the table for God to forgive. And that,
So just as you said right there,
yeah.
who are they confessing it to?
Yeah. So let's put a finer point on the question. Or is that, you want to throw that out there as a question? Okay, got it. Well, yeah, I think that,
You made a comment about.
yeah.
You're hearing the person share the wrongs to you,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, and the impact obviously.
It does.
It's okay not to be okay.
It does. Exactly. Yep. A confessing community. I'm just so convinced of this, like down to my marrow, that a confessing community is a transforming community, because one of the reasons why we don't change and don't experience life change is because exactly this. We're holding on to something we will not bring into the light. Yep. And so,
There's
yeah.
a presumption in there about God's character. as well,
Yes.
And a judgment on our part on what we think he can and can't forgive.
Yep. Yep.
We
Exactly.
impose that upon him.
Yes. Yeah. He hasn't said so. We put it there. Yeah, Michael.
Dwayne asks, can our names be removed from the book of life?
Ooh.
I don't know what that is.
I think he means can we lose our salvation?
Question number 31. Can we strike the last question? Because it's Dwayne.
Because it's Dwayne. Yeah.
Restrooms down the hall.
Yes, sir. Down the hall, and everybody should know that. Down the hall and to the left.
Is it lit back there?
Yes.
Sometimes. Okay. There is a light switch.
Down the hall to the left, Rob.
And then I'll be on your right.
He said yes.
Yeah. Yes. You can strike the question. Yeah. All right. So, yeah. What else do we got? Just so you guys know, I mean, if we don't get everything out this week, no problem. Like, it's not like we will shut new questions down. We don't say no, but we'll try to get them all out, and then in the next. What James will do, he's really good at this. He'll take all these things and he'll collect them into categories, and then we'll handle them by category. And yeah, so new questions might come up and, insert themselves into what we've already asked. Yeah. What else? Mark.
I'm a Christian in America. What in the world do I do with politics?
Oh, man.
So I'm just going to go politics, and then let's put a finer point on this. So, what are my obligations in the public sphere as a Christian politically? Am I to disengage? That's actually a pretty enduring question. Is a Christian to engage? And you're probably talking about our moment now, right? How do we engage now? But over time, this has been a really big question about just what overall is the Christian's obligation to the public sphere. We presume that the Christian should be active in some way, but not every Christian group has said that. There's some Christian groups that have said that Christians should utterly eschew. What's that fancy word? What does it mean? Reject.
Just separate.
Yeah, it just leave the sphere altogether. But you're saying, well, no, we got some obligation here. The question is what?
How do we engage?
What now, especially?
How would Jesus engage?
Yeah, that's good. So a WWJD thing about now, right? And why now is so important? I think because are you getting at this, Mark? The polarization. Like, yeah, okay. So it's so polarized. Yeah, and that's a pretty new phenomenon. Okay, so I've been walking with Jesus a long time. And you could presume that the church kind of had its specific divisions with the culture. And usually those are on really big picture moral issues: money, sex, power. And then in the last, let's say, 7 years, there's been a brand new fracture. And that fracturing is over other things: COVID policy, but not just that. The Trump phenomena created another whole layer of things that split Christians that wasn't reliable. Like there were people you just you could rely on knowing where Christians would land on certain political issues, big picture moral issues 10 years ago. And there's a whole suite now that you can't know. And it's not reliable anymore. And I think that's got everybody.
Yeah, well, the phenomena is essentially that the ideologies behind politics came into the church.
Yeah.
It's always been there. It's
No.
always been there. But
I disagree.
it came in and it supplanted the gospel as the most important thing about the church.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think initially politics in this country was formed around the Christian church. Our history has been so decimated that it's not taught the way it was. We're a Christian created country based on the Bible. The Bible was the most important book, and they were taught in schools. They were printed by our government. They held churches in the government, and it was all Christianity. The problem came when they took that idea of the separation of church and state from the letter of Jefferson to the Baptists, who were concerned more about denomination conflicts with the federal government, saying, hey, we're going to say you're going to be Baptist or you're going to be Quaker. And they're like, hey, we can't do this because Baptist had a bad name.
Yeah.
So the politics were there initially, but what happened was the slippery slope, right? So Christians slowly gave up that fight, right? They supplanted themselves.
I think we're talking about two different things, Lee. I think what you're describing is the general culture war against the church in general, and the changes that's inevitably going to bring
But
about.
it's improper.
I'm talking about specifically. I think what Rick has mentioned. What I'm talking about is the last few years,
I agree.
where it seems like even Christians are kind of
Yes.
going up against other Christians in the church
Yes.
over politics and
Yeah.
sort of sidelining the gospel.
Right.
But what I'm saying is we kind of did it to ourselves, right? So the politics today wouldn't even be, there wouldn't be the division if we still held firm to the founding that we were Christians, and before the separation church and state nonsense ruling and that kind of stuff.
But to suggest that there would be no conflict if we were all Christians,
No. I'm not saying there'd be conflict. I think there'd be more open discussion, because at least you have a
Possibly.
foundation. Because right now, what we're dealing with today is an argument against a made-up reality and saying that has to be the truth. And we have to defend the moral truth that is no longer
I think what
holding up.
Yeah, like I think what Lee is getting at, it's almost like we should put a different question up there for that. And I don't know if we can put it in the form of a question. But I think it goes to worldview. And there's no question that Christianity was the preferred worldview. It had a privileged place in America's founding. And it no longer does. I don't think that's controversial to say that. The Christianity had a privileged place in America's founding, and it no longer holds that privileged place.
I mean, look at when everybody gets appointed positions, they have a Bible that they put there now.
Right, and yeah, any little bit of history, and see, I think what Lee's getting at is, okay, and I think you've got a great point. So let's just quarantine that away from where Lee's going with this. The current divisiveness within the church about stuff. This is about the history of this particular country. And I think Lee's got a great point where it's like you have a founding with a privileged place for a particular religion, and it's Christianity. And then you have the idea that it also does not allow for the Establishment Clause. And the Establishment Clause, along with what Thomas Jefferson wrote in that letter, which is this separation of church and state, is then used to say that there should be no touching of faith in the public sphere, which is on its face false if we judge it by the founders themselves, who had chaplains in the Senate, in the Congress. These are the people who wrote the No Establishment Clause, right? So unless we think that they're craven lunatics or, just didn't understand what they were writing when they said no establishment, then clearly they did not think that having a chaplain in the Senate or giving money to Christian schools or all the other ways in which they endorsed and really privileged the Christian religion, they had no clue how that was an offense to their No Establishment Clause that they themselves wrote. So
if we were to make a question out of it, then
yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Fair to take what Mark said about how Christians should engage in the public sphere as far as politics is concerned, and then kind of tie that into how does that apply to separation, the idea.
There you go. There you go. That's good. So engagement, and let's put it into two things. In a world of separation, it's actually got a name. These are hard. Separationists, I think, is what they're called. In a world of separation of church state and let's just say pluralism, I think that's a factor, because we were not religiously pluralistic in 1776. Pluralistic. And that relates, I think, to that larger question. We are seeing a supplanting of a cultural story. And I think we're kidding ourselves, even in America, which prides itself on being a melting pot. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that this culture can reject its founding cultural narrative and continue to be cohesive. Because I think every country in the world has a cohesion, and it's sometimes about skin color, and sometimes it's about history, and sometimes it's about shared suffering or whatever. But there's always something that is pulling a society together, and it often has to do with something that everybody shares. And I think that what's happening now is the unspooling of that in our culture, and I think that actually relates to what Mark is getting at. Is this what's that coming from? To me, I'm like, and I guess I'm sort of answering the question, but I'm convinced that's a religion question. Like it's that.
How does the idea of separation of church and state play into politics today, and how should the Christian respond? Follow up: does separation of church and state presume that Christians should not be allowed to vote?
Oh yeah, that's good. Or other engagements. That that's good. Good. All right. Yep.
One last question.
All right.
Why is Calvinism and Universalism considered heresy in Christian faith?
Why is Calvinism what?
Calvinism and universalism.
Universalism. Okay.
is
And let's.
considered heresy.
Can I clarify that? Because I think I don't agree with the first part. I don't think that Calvinism is considered heresy. It is by some, but it's just considered a secondary point, I think, on which Christians disagree strongly. Some will consider to be beyond the pale. I think I think the worst place that I could put that would be in this makes it hard for Christianity to get its job done.
Is there a position in Calvinism that could be considered heresy, though? I mean, how far could you take it before somebody that is kind of like married to those core doctrines go, crossing the line there, and would you be inclined to then say something to that person?
Well, I'm giving away way too much by saying I think so. I think there's a place, but let's just put those two things separate, and let's say that the universalism is not a classic Christian doctrine, and I don't think it is actually creeping into the church. But I guess so. Let's put them together. Calvinism and universalism. Okay, can someone define universalism for anyone who doesn't know? Universalism.
Everybody's in.
Everybody's in. Exactly. No one, there is no hell on universalism. There's no.
Everybody gets a trophy.
Everybody gets a trophy. There's no ultimate condemnation.
Is that like progressive Christianity?
Yeah, progressive Christianity, for the most part, I think it's almost a point of doctrine that hell does not exist. Or if it does, it's only interpreted temporally. In other words, you are living a hell now by your choices or sin. Calvinism is defined as that way of looking at salvation and God's sovereignty as being absolute in human salvation, meaning God makes all the choices. He has predetermined who will be saved and who will not be saved. I guess that's an additional.
So that goes into what is free will and what's predestined.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's absolutely tied to that earlier question. So it's a handy little 5-point outline, kind of summarizes Calvinism, that people are totally depraved. That means that they are incapable of pleasing God in their present state, and there's no point of our human nature that's not touched by sin. That there is unconditional grace, and that means that grace comes to us without any conditions, and that includes the condition of faith. In other words, you're saved prior to belief. That's a really important part of Calvinism. So when they say unconditional, the U in tulip, the U in tulip means unconditional grace. Unconditioned, you'd say, oh, unconditional, like we don't have to work our way to it. Nope, that's not what the Calvinist means. When a Calvinist says unconditional grace, they mean prior to the condition of faith, a person is saved. L means limited atonement. So that means Jesus only died for the people that God predetermined would be saved. And then I is irresistible grace. So if God has marked you for salvation, you don't say no, you can't say no. And then, of course, some of these, really the problem is almost not with the doctrine, it's the flip side of it. It's like if there's irresistible grace, that also implies irresistible damnation. So, and then P is perseverance of the saints. So if you are marked for salvation, there's no possibility that you could fall away. That, for Calvinist, answers definitively Dwayne's question here. The P, if you believe P, answers this no. Not possible. But thank you for bringing that up, because yeah, we'll get into that, and then we'll see. Where is this a secondary issue? Where are the really primary? Where does it start to squeeze out Christianity as we kind of would define it essentially? Because I think both those things do that at some points. I would say this more than this, but I do have a handy little view that we'll show it. I think we'll get some clarity on that.
We have 4 minutes.
Well, let's wrap it up there. And someone got a burning question you just got to ask before we get up? Yes.
Is there any new questions that you guys haven't heard?
No.
No, these are pretty.
Nope. This is all.
Standard questions?
Yep. Yep. Pretty much.
I got one more.
Yes. Go, Robin.
Why do Christians feel that they have to do things to still be accepted?
Yeah. So, can I frame it like this?
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah.
works thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, why do people think they have to work their way to heaven?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question.
Because they went to Catholic school.
You're not gonna have none of that, are you?
None of your business. All right. Excellent. Thank you, guys. I just love the way your minds are working. I just really keen. I just think that's awesome. I think we're going to have great discussions the next few weeks. And yeah, like I said, 6:30 to 8. Well, James will order them, and probably, you know what we didn't have is a bunch of Bible questions. So often we'll start with Bible questions just because we talk from the presumption of Bible truth. So we usually use Bible questions as a starter because, well, do we have any reason to trust this book? But we didn't. Did we get any? We didn't get a single question on that.
We can skip it.
I have two really quick.
What's that? You could oblige us?
The Bible shares the more you seek God, the more you seek.
Can you say that again?
The more you seek God, the more He seeks you. James.
Yeah, exactly. Like resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. Yeah, that's good.
All right,
Just
throw it in.
your
How
question.
can we trust the Bible?
Okay. How can we trust the Bible?
Start with that one.
All right. We'll start with that one. And then, yeah, and then Tim will, James is kind of a genius at this. We'll probably go into God. We'll probably go to God stuff and then down into Christian.
Someday you're gonna see.
Yep. And then
stuff.
Christian living stuff. Yeah. It'll kind of go like that.
Yeah, and then after that is however you guys want.
Yeah. Let me close with a quick word of prayer. And then if you guys haven't given me your email address, and I forgot to bring a piece of paper, but give it to me, and then we will shoot you out. That's right, Jonathan. But yeah, put it in the notes or just shoot me an email, and we will make sure we get you the question list as soon as James has it brilliantly organized in a genius kind of way. So yeah. All right, let's pray. God, we have had this conversation, and I have, with the presumption that you're in the room and that you are loving the process of seeking. And as Robin has just said, there's two seekers in every relationship that you have. There's us, the human agent, and we are seeking. We're seeking truth and answers and ultimate meaning and purpose. But then there's you. And if we believe Jesus, we believe you are seeking us. You are the seeker. And what was it? It's Lewis who called you the hound of heaven. And you are on the scent. And you are looking for the children that you want to call your very own and adopt into your family and mark as yours. So, God, reveal yourself to us. That was our opening question. Reveal yourself to us. We pray that you would. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thank you, everybody. Love that you were here. Thank you so much for these questions. Hey, if you got a friend who you think, hey, you know, we asked a bunch of questions, and I got a friend who has that question, invite them, because as you can see, we got seats for them, but also you can kind of spread this link around, and we can do it live stream too. All right. Thank you, Michael. Are we still live? Signing off right now. All right. See you guys.